We will move to the next speaker to, let's say, close this overview on bees health and all the, let's say, science and methodological approaches behind. So the next speaker is Agnes Rortais. She's an ecologist and a bee biologist. She is in charge of the MOSBY project within EFSA, so the environmental risk assessment of multiple stressors in honeybees. And today she will discuss with us, she will present us exactly the same project and methodologies.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Chiara, and my apologies for this slight delay. So with this presentation, I want to give you an example on how to apply a system-based approach for the holistic environmental risk assessment of multiple stresses in bees, and in particular on honeybees. So I just want to highlight that this work provides ideas and concepts for consideration for future environmental risk assessment. So before it can be implemented in a regulatory framework, it would need further elaboration based on new scientific developments. Okay. So in a nutshell, these are the issues that I will cover during my presentation. First, some background on why bees are so important and why we should protect them. I will also highlight the complexity of the environment of bees and the complexity of the assessment of their exposure in the natural environment. Then I will present the holistic and integrated risk assessment approach that we developed for conducting an environmental risk assessment on honeybees. So this methodology is based on both modeling and monitoring approaches, and it also involves stakeholders' engagement. Finally, I will finish my presentation on the next steps at EFSA regarding the environmental risk assessment of multiple stresses in bees and more broadly of insect pollinators. I will also give you some references for further reading if you want to know more about the topic. So pollinators and mostly bees ensure the health of our environment, and they also sustain our food system and well-being through pollination. But the equilibrium is threatened by global insect and pollinator declines worldwide. There are issues, as I just mentioned earlier on how to assess, the complexity of the environment of bees. And this is because they are affected by various stresses, so biological agents, for example, infectious agents, pests, invasive species, also chemical stresses, for example, pesticides, fertilizers, biocides, and contaminants. And there are also several factors modulating these stresses, for example, climate change, decreasing habitat quality and quantity, and also the specific bee responses to the stresses in relation to their ecology, their behavior, their sensitivity. So in agricultural landscapes, as you can see on the photo, it can be complex and changing over time. And as a result, bees might be exposed to multiple chemicals over time. This is mostly linked to the farming practices that are using several chemicals at a time or over time on crops, and also to the foraging behavior of bees covering several crops per unit time. However, the potential interactions between different stresses and their possible combined effects, they are not currently considered by the regulatory framework. Therefore, to better take into account the complexity of this environment and the exposure of bees, it appears that a paradigm shift is needed. So, what is Europe and EFSA doing to address such declines and complexity? Domenica, in her presentation, she provided in great details the EU legal framework behind the risk assessment of pesticides that is covered by Regulation 1107 and the Directive 128, so I won't spend additional time on this. EFSA in the area of environmental risk assessment of pesticides is advancing with the revision of the current B guidance that she also mentioned. It also published recently a guidance on the risk assessment of combined exposure to multiple chemicals, looking at exposure to human, animals, and the environment, and you will hear more about it tomorrow. And also a scientific opinion on combined exposure of multiple stresses in bees. And we have also published this editorial that you can see on the right, which summarizes the main outcomes of these documents, the guidances and the opinion. The efforts that EFSA is making to advance the environmental risk assessment are in line with the EU Green Deal plan for actions, and in particular for addressing combined effects from multiple pollutants, including multiple chemicals, and for reducing the use and risk of chemical pesticides by encouraging, for example, innovation for the development of safe and sustainable alternatives. So this is exactly the objective of the EFSA project MOSBY, and it stands for EU efforts towards a holistic and integrated risk assessment approach of multiple stresses in bees. This work started in 2015 as a self-task mandate at EFSA, and later on in 2018 it was supported by the European Parliament, who tasked EFSA to develop a scientific opinion on this topic. Here are the terms of reference, which clearly are on two scientific aspects. First, on the development of the risk assessment methodology that accounts for multiple stresses, and second, on the development of a guidance to stakeholders to collect and share harmonized data on bee health for evidence-based risk assessment. MOSBY Framework is based on several distinct but complementary groups of experts working transversally across disciplines. So at the basis, we have the multidisciplinary task force of EFSA staff that spans across scientific units and departments. The task force coordinates several working groups of external experts which have a cross-fertilized approach across regulatory sectors. For example, the Behave and the Healthy Bee Working Group, which have delivered important work on modeling and monitoring aspects. And I will present that later in my slides, what they have delivered. The work developed by EFSA staff also and external experts was also supported by stakeholders, which are engaged in collecting and sharing with EFSA harmonized data on bees and pollinators. Again, I will present more on this later in my presentation. Finally, through the development of the project, we have continuous consultations and discussions and collaboration were made with our partners in member states and from the European Commission and the European Parliament. In 2015, EFSA assessed the suitability of the Behave model for the risk assessment of multiple stresses in honeybees at the landscape level. This assessment was made following the guidance issued by EFSA on the good modeling practices for the use of models in risk assessment. In 2016, the MOSBY working group took further this work by designing a conceptual model for the risk assessment of multiple stresses at the landscape level. Alors, for this purpose, various interlinked modules were defined. So we have the colony dynamics module, reflecting on the demography and the behavior of the different categories of bees, including castes and larval and adult life stages. The in-hive products module with pollen, nectar, bee breath, wax, royal jelly water. The foraging module, reflecting on the bee decisions that are influenced by colony stores and the landscape in terms of resources and weather conditions. The landscape module, comprising land use, habitat structure and composition, local weather, and where the colonies are placed. The pesticides exposure module, which reflect on the in-hive and exposure in-hive and outside the hive. and also the infectious agents module, taking into account loads of Varroa, Nosema, and their associated viruses. And also we took into consideration the beekeeping management practices that may influence the colony dynamics. So this work is still undergoing. It is outsourced by EFSA, and it is led by the Aarhus University in Denmark. The model is still under development. It is called APISRAM, and I will show you later in the next step associated with this work. So tomorrow you will hear more about this on chemical mixtures, but I just wanted to give you this slide to show that we have also considered this for bees. And this is, for example, with the use of dynamic energy models. So that's the external scientific report published in 2016. And as also mentioned earlier, we also published this guidance on the methodologies to assess chemical mixtures, where bees were used as a case study. There is an animation. Okay, so here, these are the deliverables on the monitoring side. So this is in addition to the modeling approach that I just presented earlier on with the design of APISRAM. In 2016, EFSA published an opinion for harmonized data collection schemes with the development of a toolkit providing indicators and methods to assess bee health in field conditions in a standardized way. The MOSBY working group used the work developed under this opinion to design a field data collection for the testing and validation of the model APISRAM. In 2018, EFSA outsourced this data collection in Denmark and Portugal. This work was finalized and published this year. Again, the links are provided, so you can access those reports if you want to know more. It's a little bit slow. Trying to go to the next slide. Okay, here we go. So to achieve a holistic and integrated environmental risk assessment of multiple stresses in honeybees, the MOSBY working group put forward this system-based approach, which comprises a modeling and a monitoring system that are linked by a multi-directional flow of data and information and by substantial stakeholders' involvement. The modeling part is the APISRAM model defined and calibrated with data coming from the field, as I explained in my previous slides. APISRAM simulates the complex dynamic of a honeybee colony in changing landscapes, and it can simulate acute and sublethal effects from either single or multiple chemicals in interaction with other stresses. The monitoring component is represented by a network of sentinel hives placed across representative climatic zones and landscapes in Europe. The hives will be equipped with digital sensors for harmonized data collection and storage and analysis on a platform linked to the network. The system-based approach can be used as a predictive tool to estimate risks from new products to be put on the market, and the monitoring of the hives and their environment to validate the predicted risks of the product after it is released in the environment. In that way, the approach allows a more realistic risk assessment. So these are a few photos just to show you the equipment that we have used and to collect data in an automatic and semi-automatic way to ensure high data standards. High quality data is really needed if we want to calibrate and validate the model. On the left, you have a pollen trap at the hive entrance to assess the quantity and quality of pollen brought back to the hive. In the center, the device to assess the weight of the colony. It's an automatic scale, and this assesses the size of the colony in real time, and on the right, a weather station. Some more device on my next slide. Okay, here we go. So on the left, you have a setup to make pictures of combs of high quality, and below is a picture of a comb which went through an image analysis to assess the food source, so the pollen, the nectar, and the demographics of the brood development from egg to pupae. The analyses are made with a software developed by the contractor that is called DeepBee. It's an algorithm. On the right, an observation hive to assess foraging location based on the decoding of the forager's waggle dance. And it is cross-cut with flower mapping in the landscape and pollen analysis brought back to the hive. Once the system-based approach is operational, it will provide benefits to multiple stakeholders. For beekeepers who could use the colonies as an early warning system, providing alerts to new and emerging colony stresses. For farmers to ensure the quality of their good farming practices in relation to the health status of the bees that are present in the vicinity. For scientists to access high quality data and address key scientific questions, including an improved understanding of the relative importance of different stresses on honeybee colony health. For risk assessors, the approach would allow them to evaluate the impact of single or multiple pesticides in the context of all the stresses that are faced by honeybee colonies. And this is a substantial departure from the current one substance, one assessment approach. Finally, for risk managers, they could critically evaluate the full range of risk mitigation measures, including integrated pest management, linked to site-specific assessments in relation to local agricultural landscapes. As a consequence, risk mitigation strategies could be tailored to local contexts, facilitating linkages across multiple EU regulatory frameworks relating to pesticides, agriculture, and the environment. The proposed approach could also be used as an exploratory tool to inform the setting of protection goals. And finally, for citizens to gain trust and have a better awareness and understanding of pollinator declines. These benefits also link through the EUB Partnership initiative, which started at Bee Week in 2017 with encouragement from members of the European Parliament. It is an initiative driven by stakeholders and supported by EFSA. The partnership focuses on the collection and management of harmonized data on bees for the benefit of all. In 2021, the EFSA outsourced the development of a prototype platform for the purpose of the EUB partnership. And I would like to show you a video, but it's not working. Look, I will send you the link so you can see the video. It's a very nice video that explains the scope and the state of the art of this platform, prototype platform. So if anybody is interested, please contact me or contact the organizing committee. Okay, just wanted to show this slide to highlight, that in addition to stakeholders that will interact with the system-based approach, we will have also support that is very important for ongoing research development. And here you have two ongoing projects from Horizon 2020, so MOSBY and Be Good. And these are very relevant to the whole approach. The first one, MOSBY, is on developing tools, methods, and generating data for strengthening the risk assessment of multiple stresses in the 3 bee types, so honeybee, bumblebee, solitary bee. And Be Good is working on indicators for assessing the health status of honeybees. Okay. Here is this is the development for the next steps. So just very briefly, APISRAM will be ready in January 2022, and before it can be used in a regulatory framework with taking into account chemical mixtures, we will have to wait a couple more years. And just wanted to give you some further reading if interested. So at the moment, there is the EPEU Pollinator Week conference if you're interested, I think this is a very good conference to follow. The revised EFSA guidance, you heard about it from Domenica, and the new era approach for insect pollinators at EFSA. So we have developed this to reach the goals by 2030 to be ready, that I will present tomorrow. So in summary, the project is about advancing the environmental risk assessment for insect pollinators with support and collaboration of European Commission, European agencies and member states. It's to support the different actions and the farm to fork and biodiversity strategies under the EU Green Deal, and to address also the current challenges and ensure preparedness for future challenges. The project covers 6 scientific areas, from engagement to the development of risk assessment tools and methodologies comprising the system-based approach. But for the interest of time, we cannot go into further details. So if you want more details, I invite you to follow the EP Pollinator Week tomorrow, where I will present a little bit more. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Agnes. Thank you for your presentation. Don't worry for the technical issues, they can happen always, no problem at all.